All right. Welcome, everyone, to the Portage County Safety Council. We appreciate everyone being here. We are really excited for today's presentation. When bad things happen to good companies, protect your brand from safety mishaps. Jeff and Stephen are here from the Prodigal Company, and they'll talk a little bit about their business, and then they're also going to give us some great information, so we appreciate them being here. Before that, as usual, though, I have a couple updates from Bureau of Workers' Compensation to go through with you. For those of you who have not had the opportunity, I know we have some new guests visiting today. My name is Nick Koya, and I work with the state of Ohio through the Bureau of Workers' Compensation, and we partner with the Portage County Safety Council to make these events possible. I want to remind everyone that we are still offering safety consulting services as part of your Ohio BWC premiums, but we're doing this in a virtual capacity right now. We can offer virtual consultations at your company and provide virtual training for your staff. Additionally, we will not be having any third quarter or fourth quarter in-person training. So the earliest we'll see that is July of this year to have in-person again. However, we have a webinar series now, and we have a bunch of online training classes. So go to bwclearningcenter.com to check out that information. As always, a reminder, if you have specific questions related to safety and health that deal with COVID-19, please check out the state of Ohio's website at coronavirus.ohio.gov. Exciting news, March 10th and 11th is Ohio Safety Congress and Expo. We're gonna do this a little different this year. It's gonna be virtual, but registration is now open. So go ahead and take a look at that. If you have questions related to Ohio Safety Congress and Expo, let me know. Our topic this year is We've Got You Covered, and we have some great new digital content. I think it's going to be very interactive, and I'm excited for this event. So please check it out. There'll be topics for every industry, and it will be well worth your time investment. We have some OSHA updates I want to remind you about. Don't forget about your February 1st deadline. I should say 2021. You have to have your 300 A's posted by February 1st to meet federal guidelines. And then those 300 A's need to be submitted by March 2nd to the Department of Labor. Also, OSHA announced that they have increased their violations this year. Max penalty for serious violation is going to be $13,653 per occurrence. Max penalty for your willful or repeat violation will be $136,000. This goes with the inflation rate for the United States is how they determine these rates now. Also, a lot of questions related to COVID-19 record keeping. COVID-19 is a recordable illness if you meet the following criteria. The case is a confirmed case. It is work-related, defined by 1905.5, and it meets one or more of the general recording criteria. If you have specific questions related to that, please see me, get a hold of me after the meeting, and I will take a look and walk through those cases with you and help you determine if that needs to go on your OSHA log or not. As usual, you can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and on our WordPress website to keep up to date on all the Ohio BWC information. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Debbie, our steering team member, to introduce today's presenters.
Good morning, everyone. It's so hard to believe it's already the end of January, but here we are. And today we are lucky to have Jeff with us. And he also has Stephen with him. He's going to do a little intro on Stephen as when they get started. Jeff is the founder and the current lead brand strategist of Prodigal. As a passionate and a prominent speaker on various branding topics. He was the moderator of the branding panel at the first Ohio Marketing Summit, featuring brands such as Lincoln Electric and the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Jeff started his career as an award-winning writer at Cleveland Magazine and then a senior writer at the Glazon Creative before founding Prodigal. Over the past decade, Jeff has conceived and co-developed the brand MRI, an innovative and efficient branding process that has been successfully engaged by more than 60 privately held companies. Jeff also has a teenage daughter who is significantly smarter, I don't know about that, except possibly on the subject of branding. Right. So with that, welcome, Jeff. Thanks for being with us.
Hey, Debbie, thanks for that introduction. Thank you, everyone. I know your time is valuable. I'm going to do my best for you. Number one, because that's my obligation. Number two, if you've met Mike Thompson, you know he's a nice guy, but he's also a big and strong guy, and I don't want to get him mad at me. Just to provide a little context for those of you out there, I don't know who all is joining us, but I know some categories. So I know we have some cities and villages, some municipalities from around Ohio. So therefore, you might know our work with the Regional Income Tax Agency. Maybe Rita collects and administers your taxes. If you're a municipal taxpayer and that makes you mad, sorry about that, but we try to do a good job for Rita. I know we have some healthcare organizations. We've done our branding process, for example, for Mercy Health. I know that we have, I think, some financial institutions. Farmers National Bank is an example. Retailer, Sheely's Furniture and Appliance, which just opened in Aurora, and just the context of that. But I know we have a lot of manufacturers, and just to give you an example, and somebody we're going to talk about that we did branding with is Humtown Products and Additive. Now, you may or may not know the name, kind of a funny name, Humtown, but actually, as you may be aware, they were just named the National Association of Manufacturers Small Manufacturer of the Year for the entire country for their taking the lead in the commercialization of 3D printing. And we're actually a little bit going to take you through how we did branding for them, and you can think of it for your company. Now, even though this is technically supposed to be the sponsorship portion, really what I'm going to do is not do a big commercial now, but talk about the fact that you can approach branding as a data-driven process. And no matter what category of business you're in, hospitals, financial institutions, retail, manufacturing, everyone in this call, cities, you have a brand. And later on, we're going to talk about how the best way to think of your brand is the marketplace perception of the value of your brand, the perception of the value your brand brings to the marketplace, whether you're a product, company, or service, right? And so we're going to take you through this. I like to think it's going to be something that you really haven't thought about in terms of how a brand should be viewed. And it's a lot more practical than maybe some mystical idea that branding is about image or awareness. It's about far more than that. And we're going to just dive right into it. So you see on the screen, brand is to an organization what identity is to an individual. Now, what we mean by that is, if you're a person on this call, likely you've had some success in life. That's why you're in the position you're in. And part of the reason you're in the position you're in is at some point you realize that what you want to understand is who you are, what value you bring, and then out of that, what you should do. So a lot of times when young people come to me for business advice, what should they do in their career? What should I do? What should I do? It's actually, who are you and what is it about you that people value? And then out of that, you're going to find out what you should do in that order. Now, companies are similar. Companies that understand and communicate what's most valuable about their brand. First of all, you don't waste resources communicating what does not matter to your market. Probably the oldest statement about advertising that I'm aware of, you might have heard one of the first retail advertisers in the 20s said, I know half of my advertising dollars are wasted. I just don't know which half. So part of the idea, when you understand what your competitive advantages are, you focus your dollars on that. Whether you're a CEO on this call, you're a marketing director, we know that's important to you. Second thing is you're always making known your most powerful attributes and benefits. Attributes are the positive characteristics of your product, company, or service. Benefits, of course, are the benefits that customers derive from those attributes. And sometimes you have an attribute and various customers see different benefits of that same attribute. And you need to understand that difference. You're always engaged in differentiating yourself from your competitors. So that's one of the key steps is differentiation. Doesn't matter whether you're a city competing for businesses that come in or tourism, or whether you're a hospital competing with a fellow hospital, how do you differentiate yourselves and your competitive advantages? And ultimately, that all should add up to staking a claim to a very clear position that you own in the marketplace that you can own and expand upon. And by the way, along the way, if you've got some questions, you want to stop me, I'm like a little bit of a train, I get going, put in the chat box. I think Debbie and Renee are going to be monitoring that. I told them they have full authority just to stop me in my tracks and say, hey, we've got a question here that someone has about what you're talking about. So let's make this interactive and do not hesitate to ask questions. And again, Debbie or Renee, just go ahead and let me know. All right. So one of the keys is, again, branding sometimes is this mystical thing. It seems to be very opinion driven and just some people's preferences, but it shouldn't be. And in fact, we have got a great quote we love from W. Edwards Deming. If you can't describe what you're doing as a process, you don't know what you're doing. So we've really spent a lot of time at Prodigal creating a process, and that's what we want to get into. And by the way, when we're done with this, if you'd like Mike to email this to you, if you find it of value, absolutely, please do. And you're going to see some interesting things in this. Okay. So we've actually changed from the brand MRI to the brand scan, and that's what our process is called. A few different versions of it. We're just going to go over the basics. So it's built on a foundation of 2 best practices. Look, like a lot of you out there, we think we have a great idea, but really great ideas are not necessarily truly original. They take a couple of existing great ideas and synthesize it into something new, and that's what we believe we've done. So first, there's brand positioning. And what you're trying to understand is this was developed by Al Reese and Jack Trout. And if I could recommend to the marketers out there, really anybody in business, one book to read about branding, it's definitely this book. And it's great that it's 40 years old, because everything these guys talked about was true then and is true today. These are enduring truths. And essentially they're saying things like, for example, hey, it doesn't matter what anybody thinks about whatever your brand is. It only matters what you think about your brand relative to their other choices, right? Everything, and you're going to hear from Stephen in a moment, my colleague, about behavioral economics. Everything in branding is about comparative choice rather than opinion. Ultimately, you're trying to understand, you see that Venn diagram, attributes of excellence? Basically, hey, what are you good at? Okay, what are you good at? But more importantly, what are you good at that actually you're better at than most of your competitors? And finally, the customer's value. So what are you good at, better than your competitors, and customers most highly value? When you figure out what those things are and synthesize them, that's your optimal brand position in the marketplace. And that's what should guide all of your branding and marketing messaging. By the way, this is all going to tie into what we call safety branding. So again, this isn't just a pitch, hopefully. This is really kind of laying the groundwork for how to think about your brand, whether you're marketing or whether you've got some safety issues you have to deal with. And I'm going to turn it now to Stephen Jakubowski, my young colleague, is a brand strategist himself. He's got his master's in economics from Cleveland State University and really is an expert on behavioral economics. And I'll let him explain a little what that's all about.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jeff. Good morning, everybody. So this is the second part of what comprises the brand MRI or brand scan. It's really where Jeff's colleague, Adam Richards, or myself come in when we're engaging with this process. It marries Reese and Trout's positional branding with behavioral econ. So I'm not sure if any of you have read Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow, but it posited this illustration of the human condition where there are 2 speeds of thinking. System 1, that fast decision making. It's almost a gut reaction, frequently using something called heuristics or mental shortcuts. Good enough approximations to draw a conclusion about something. And then system 2, it's slower, more laborious, detail-oriented thinking to arrive at something that's a wholly rational decision. Humans use both of these thought processes. We frequently switch between the 2 of them when coming to a conclusion. But system 1 really takes a lot of responsibility for what you do on a day-to-day basis. It provides that initial groundwork for your final decision. Nobody weighs every attribute or every benefit when deciding on a product. If you did that when going to the grocery store looking for toothpaste or arugula, you'd be weighing 47 things. You'd be at the grocery store for half the day, and you'd leave with 10 tubes of toothpaste. So successful positional branding, when done properly through the brand MRI or the brand scan, queries your teams, your customers, your prospects, and figures out what matters most. When you use that system 1 thinking, what of those top 2, top 3 pieces of information is most relevant with your clientele, is most relevant with people who are invested in your city, in your business, in your product, whatever it may be. And then we figure out how to orient you towards marketing and branding on that which is most relevant to people's initial, that system 1 portion of thought.
Thank you, Stephen.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So basically, then we're going to take this information, and you would in any branding process, there's that market research, how you go about determining your ideal position and translating it into position. And then, of course, it doesn't do you any good unless you creatively communicate it to the marketplace. So when we do it, and any good agency should do this, there's the research, there's the strategy, and then there's the creative direction. And you're missing any one of those, and you're going to have an unsuccessful branding campaign. Okay. But to get into more specifics, so we're going to talk about, we have permission from our client Hometown. We have some things redacted from this, but to talk about, well, how do we go about branding this company? We did this, by the way, before they became the National Associated Manufacturer, then Manufacturer of the Year, then of course added that into our insights into them. And so we're going to go through kind of a very like 30,000 foot overview of how we go about doing this. And you're going to see it's very much data driven, and it's all about comparison rather than strictly speaking opinion. So this first thing, hey, it doesn't matter what, if you're a hospital or you're a city, someone's saying, hey, what city should I move to put my business in? You're a hospital, hey, someone's saying, whether it's a doctor choosing what hospital to be affiliated with, whether it's a patient deciding what hospital do I want this procedure done, or whether you're a manufacturer, you're, let's say, a powder coating company, and there's 5 choices for a customer out there. People start their decision-making by looking at a category, right? And they expect certain things of a category. And what we have found over time by doing all these is people, almost every industry category has about 70 to 90 attributes. So we start our process internally with our clients, and we have them come up with, what do you think are the attributes that people are looking for in the industry category, from a hospital, from a bank, from a manufacturer, right? And we found that never do they come up with less than 70. And even if we give them more than the 35 minutes we do, they can rarely come up with more than 90 attributes. So attributes are actually very finite. And of course, many of them cut across every business category. So here you can see our client is actually a sand, core, and mold manufacturer for the foundry industry. You don't need to understand the specifics. Some of you manufacturers would know exactly what I'm talking about, but you can see it. So our client came up with all these 90 things. But like Stephen said, guess what? Even the most diligent purchasing manager, let alone a consumer in a consumer product, doesn't weigh all those 90 data points. They don't have the time, number one. They may not have the means to do it, but finally, they know that all 90 of those things aren't important for making a final decision, because many are things that every company has in whatever category, right? So we take that list of 90, and then the next step we take the group through is we're going to narrow them. We're going to get rid of about half of them. They're easy to say, yeah, everyone has that, everyone does that, or customers don't use that to me. It's not important enough. Let's say you're a bank. Well, yeah, your bank used to offer lollipops in the drive-through for the kids, right? But no one's going to choose you for that, right? And that's a easy example. But so you go from, and this is, by the way, what the mind does. Your mind does this, as Stephen said, every time you walk in the store, I'm looking for, a case of beer. Maybe I shouldn't talk about beer. I don't know, whatever, toothpaste. What am I going to do? Well, these are all the things it can offer me, but you're going to narrow it down to start making that choice, right? So after your mind and our group goes through the narrowing, we go through a series of questions. The next thing is you don't know this, but you actually group those attributes. And one of the things that we've done is we figured out that there are actually 9 master categories of attributes for any business in any category. You can see those, you see across the top, this is our periodic table of branding elements. And you can see across the top are the master categories. Everyone's looking for things like assurance. There's issues of cost, of customer service, of customization, of ease of use, of knowledge, of positive outcomes, product, and then time. And go back to the other then, Steve. And so you can see then we took all those attributes and we're able to categorize the things they came up with that belonging to those 9 categories. This is also great because if something's missing, if someone says, yeah, cost is never a factor, well, how often in life is that the case, right? Maybe once in a great while, but almost never. We know we're missing something. So we group all those things that way. All right. Again, we have our proprietary thinking there. And then we help them go down and narrow it into a list of the top 10 attributes in order, right? So people go through and they narrow it down, and then we say, in order, what's most important? And in this industry, our client said, well, they got to provide solutions, needs to be a seamless concept delivery process, competitive pricing, not necessarily the cheapest price in this industry, because cheap price could mean bad products, responsive customer communication, and so on. And you see, actually, we allowed them because they had a tie between 10 and 11, right? And again, this is the same thing that every consumer or customer's mind does when they're going to make a choice. That's what we're mimicking, but drawing on the wisdom of the group. And in these groups, we're going to have anybody who's customer facing, who's relevant to decision making. Yeah, the CEO, maybe the marketing director, but that customer service person, maybe the person on the production line who gets the calls from customers who, when they're upset or has a challenging problem they want help with, right? So those are the insights. And with this process, we force people to make choices, because that's what happens in the marketplace. As Stephen said, everyone makes a choice finally. And so that's the same thing we do to the group. You've got to make a choice and you got to rank just like the brain does. Okay, so we got those top 10. Now, do you remember what I said earlier? For those of you who are paying attention, I'm sure you were. Recent trial said, hey, it doesn't matter what anybody thinks of your brand. It only matters what they think of your brand relative to their other choices. So for example, I might ask Joe's Steakhouse if I was working with them to expand in other markets. Hey, Joe, do people love your steaks? Yeah, my steaks are the best in the market. They're great. Here's what I do. But if I got people to rate those steaks against others, they might say, yeah, I like Joe's steak, but you know what? Capitol Grill or Ruth Chris or Morton's is actually better. It's actually Joe's pricing that's really why I go there, right? So you get that basic concept. So you can see here as we took, if you see that left-hand column, I don't know, Stephen, if we can make that a little larger or not for folks. The left-hand column has those 10 top attributes. Across the top, then, you see the competitors to my client, Humptown, on the far right. And then we go about ranking our client versus competitors in each of those attributes. Because, hey, folks, it doesn't matter if there's something that people are looking for as the number one attribute. If you're not good at it, you can't brand yourself based on that. So it's not just what customers want. It's what they want and you're good at, right? Otherwise, listen, the worst thing you can do is brand yourself on something you can't deliver on. So reality does matter in branding. It's not just the perception. I say it's perception of the value of a brand in the marketplace, but over time, that perception is found out and is based on truth. You know, it's like Lincoln's thing. You can fool some of the people some of the time, but you can't fool all the people all the time. And once they know they've been fooled, they may never forgive you. Okay. So we go through a process. I won't go detail of how then based on whether they were number one and the third most important thing, number two and the second most important thing. And we rank those attributes based on where their strengths truly are. And then we're able to take those. And really part of the key is taking the top three attributes that they're good at, better than their competitors, and customers highly value, if you remember that Venn diagram. And then we translate that into a brand position. I won't go over a lot of detail here, but the brand position for this client is the global leader in additive and conventional manufacturing of complex sand cores and molds. Now, notice a key word there, folks, you in manufacturing, complex sand cores and molds, right? A lot of foundries, for example, they'll build their own sand cores and molds, and they can do it fairly well. But when it gets complicated, that's when they're in trouble. And that's where our client really finds its sweet spot. So instead of saying, yeah, we can build cores and molds, we can do it cheaply. No, we can build the complex ones the best. And then you're going to create your brand value proposition. You probably know the word value proposition. It's like that, but tailored so you understand that it's really about your brand. And really in one or two sentences, we communicate what gives our client the right to own that brand position. And hey, you should do the same thing, whether you hire us, and of course I think you should, or you don't, you work with an agency. You want to know what's the position I can own the marketplace and what's my brand value proposition? Well, what gives me the right to own that? And then this is like the blueprint for all your marketing and branding messaging moving forward. We then translate that into we're not showing it to you, a brand story. And again, that's more a narrative form. That's like your about section on your webpage.
Renee's got a question.
Hey,
Sure.
Jeff.
Yes.
So before you move on, you were talking about the your competitors and ranking them. Who's ranking those competitors? Is that like something that you guys have access to? Is that like an internal thing? Who's
There's two ways. In the abbreviated version of the process, it is simply the client ranking themselves against their competitors. And you might think, oh yeah, well actually clients are brutally hard on themselves, especially when they have specific attributes. Because you know what happens? Let's say the CEO is like, yeah, we're great at that. Well, the sales guy is going to say, I'm sorry, no, we're not, because he wants to tell, here's the real problem I'm having in the marketplace, or the production manager. Now, however, then if you go with the marketplace process, what we do is we take these findings and we take a digital survey by email out to the customers and prospects, and we have them take a version of the same process to vet that. But, Renee, the reality is that usually clients are pretty dead on. Now, what they may not know is specifically why customers, value that attribute or benefit, and that's the customers. But rarely we found a situation where the clients are totally lying to themselves. Hey, the clients are paying us money to do this. They want to come out of this knowing what they really should brand themselves on. And usually as a collective group, again, somebody in the room may be fooling themselves, but those 12 people we usually have in the room, collectively together, they're going to hold each other accountable. But again, then we have another process that most clients, but not all, go through, where they vet that through their customers. And again, we have a very specific way we do that. Great question. Thank you.
And Jeff,
Sure.
While we're on it, I don't want to get too far ahead. So if you're going to talk about this later,
Sure.
Please ignore the question. But in one of your branding hacks videos, which I love, by the way, if anyone's out there, check out Jeff's branding hack videos, because it breaks this down in small increments. Is phenomenal. You talked about the brand paradox, where yes, we own our brand, because we all know a brand is so much more than a logo, but also we don't own our brand at the same time.
Yeah.
And we see that a lot now with the political and social climate out there. Of one person that does something that has nothing to do with the company, or could somehow associate with the company, or throw a blanket accusation, can get us a lot of trouble. And we're seeing now closed distribution and supply chain channels and different things like that. So I don't know if you're going to touch on that later. If so, ignore that. But
to a degree, but I think this is a good place, Mike. I like that question. And so what Mike's referring to, the brand paradox, and here's what it is. So there are two sources to a brand's economic value to its owners, right? Number one is what you traditionally think about. That's the ability of the brand to drive sales in the marketplace, right? People prefer your brand, so they come to you. And that's, that's obviously priceless. That's why we do branding, right? We don't want people to go through every time they leave the house, what store should I go to? We want them to think of us and be loyal to us, right? So that's part of it. And then the second part, though, is its value to a private enterprise as an owned economic asset. Increasingly, CPAs for their clients, when they're doing a company valuation, they're saying, hey, what's the value of that brand? In some cases, if you think of national examples, Apple, Coca-Cola, Disney, the reality is the brand is worth more than all the tangible assets they have, right? Put a movie out there, slap the name Disney on it, not just slap it on, but have Disney, and it's going to get customers, right? That brand. So similarly, the idea is this: you unfortunately don't really own your brand in the traditional marketing sense, right? The marketplace owns your brand. There's what you think of your brand, what your customers think of your brand, and what the marketplace, including those who know nothing about you until they hear about you for the first time, think of your brand. So you have to understand, it isn't just what you think of it. Now you can then direct it. You can try to position it. That's what we try to do, but you don't own it, right? That's the danger. You're out in the marketplace, people on social media saying crazy things. That's why you monitor your social media, right? That's why we are going to get into why, on the safety issue, why you got to be branding constantly. So if something negative happens, when bad things happen to good company, you can react. The other piece, again, we won't get much into that today, but happy to talk to any private enterprise companies out there about that, because we're involved in that, is actually putting a financial value on your brand and growing it over time, so that value, when you go to sell, is at its height. And there's ways to measure and grow that. So that's that paradox. I don't really own it in the marketplace, but I do own it as an asset. But of course, even though you don't own it, that's why you got to be very active in trying to manage it and trying to hit those things in the bud, whether social media and so forth. You're on mute, Mike.
Yeah, just a quick story with that, Jeff. There was a company in Portage County who had, unfortunately, a death a few years back. And that company had a good reputation until that point. Now, when people drive by or it's referenced, it's actually not referred to by its name, and I won't name the company, but it's actually referred to as, oh, that's the place where the guy got killed.
Yeah.
And so literally people looking for jobs now don't want to work there as a result of that. And also that its identity, its branding identity literally shifted because of one accident.
Yeah, and Stephen's going to talk directly about, I don't know, it's not that, but a very similar example of that happening. He's going to talk about something called anchor bias. The first thing you hear about a company or a person, right? Same thing happens with a person, might be the thing that anchors you going on. And so that's why it's so important to already have a positive brand perception out there. So if something bad happens, right, you're able to recover from it. But that's a great example. Thank you, Mike. So, hey, listen, those of you who either old enough or, of course, remember Paul Brown from the Cleveland Browns, he used to say, when people asked him, hey, you're running Jim Brown, the great running back, too much. And he said, hey, when you have a cannon, you fire it, right? Similar, hey, when we won this award, or rather when Humtown did the National Manufacturing Leadership Awards and the Manufacturer of the Year, we pound that, right? We're going to pound that And that was awarded the end of 2020 through 2021, because going to that shorthand way, like, hey, this is the National Associated Manufacturer of the Year, right? They must be good. So this is an example of an ad we did because of 2 leadership awards. Actually, they won based on how they do things. But now let's go. You saw that branding process we went through. Well, how do we bring that to life? So one of the problems is that they find that foundries sometimes say, yeah, but I think it's cheaper for me to do it in-house and have my own pattern making, mold making team instead of outsourcing it to you, Hometown. Well, here's an ad that we created to help people see all the ways by having an internal team, they lose money. Scrap problems, employee benefits, utilities, silica testing, equipment maintenance, environmental testing. You can imagine. So if you're a value add company, and a lot of manufacturers out there are, right, you've got to communicate what's so valuable about your brand that actually overcomes some of those seeming cost issues that people think that you bring to the table, and how actually over the lifetime cycle of what you're doing, your brand is the better way to go. All right, well, listen, we want to keep moving on. Any other questions that I want to make sure, Debbie or Renee, anything else? All right, now we're going to move from the sponsorship portion to really getting to the nitty gritty of how you should think about safety branding. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Stephen Jakubowski. When bad things happen to good companies.
Hello again, everyone.
And Stephen, just want you to make sure we're at 11:34, so you're going to have to probably skip over a few things, I think, to keep us moving.
Speed will be prioritized. All right.
Okay.
So we talked about behavioral economics briefly earlier when we introduced the foundational elements of the brand scan. So it studies that impact of emotional, cultural, and psychological factors that affect everyday decision making, where we spend our money, how we spend our money, and why does this matter? Well, it matters because we're not entirely rational. As we talked about with the brand scan, people use those heuristics, those little gut reads to figure out what they're going to do. Sometimes those make sense. Other times, when you're looking at biases, there's a failure of logic, there's a failure of rationality that takes place. So, how is this field applied? It's a relatively young field, and so it's fun to see how everything is transitioned from theory into what people are doing on a day-to-day basis. One of my favorites of all time, arrival time clocks in mass transit. So started in London, you see it all over the world now. You see those countdown clocks, next train, next bus arriving in 7 minutes. They did this because when they surveyed the people who were riding the buses, riding the trains, they went, oh my God, it takes forever to get anything. Can't get a bus in a timely manner. By eliminating that uncertainty in arrival time, people got a lot happier, ridership increased. The difference was seeing that there was a 7-minute countdown timer waiting for something was comfortable for people. 5 minutes waiting, wondering and being worried as to whether or not it would be 25 minutes, people were miserable. This again also speaks to the success of ride-sharing companies like Uber or Lyft. You see that little, you order up the ride on your phone, it shows up, everything's great, everything's wonderful. People think it's more efficient, people think it's more cost effective. It hasn't been for quite some time. Frequently it's more expensive and frequently it takes longer to get than a traditional cab, but people use it because it eliminates uncertainty. So, the same way people don't behave rationally in train stations or when hailing a cab, they don't behave rationally in the workplace. So these same theories have found application using these heuristics and biases in education and safety practices in the workplace. Siemens has worked with a company for quite some time now, redesigning their safety training and education for greater adoption in the workplace. When they surveyed people, they found that their education on safety and everything like that, it relied very heavy on protocols and paid very little attention to practical application. This frequently left workers feeling that safety protocols existed kind of like as these required steps. They were antithetical, they didn't exist in line with productivity, that safety somehow stood in the way of their productivity. Is that rational? No, not really at all, but it's the impression that workers were getting. So Siemens redesigned how they approached and valued and talked about safety, how they talked about training. They focused, instead of on the protocols, on the practical application. This is what happens if. This is why we do this. And all of a sudden, buy-in increased. People started to engage with these processes more. When surveyed, workers said, oh, I find these safety protocols to be valuable to what I do on a day-to-day basis. Now, You're also seeing this not just in the way that we talk about safety and not just in the way that we train, but in the way products are designed. So you're looking on onboard tech for heavy machinery. You've got these auto stop features. You've got the programmable logic controllers, the PLCs. All of these things have been introduced and are continuing to be introduced to try to ensure that people engage with products more safely. They not only provide those stopgaps, those emergency sort of backups in case of human error, but what they provide is the ability to get workers retrained, more efficient. It can reduce scrap, it can reduce waste, and it makes sure everything is going off more safely on a day-to-day basis. All right. So that's all well and good. We found applications. Behavioral economics is helping us have a safer, healthier, and happier world. We've increased adherence to safety protocols, and more folks understand why we have them. But accidents still happen. When they happen, you have to interact with the world at large. You have to explain the situation, comfort the public, and allow your business to return to being that valuable, productive member of the community. Achieving that is really where branding comes in. So when branding is done properly, it's informed by the biases found in behavioral econ, and your road to recovery is significantly smoother. So what is your brand? Jeff mentioned this earlier, and it's up on the screen now. Your brand is that perceived value of your company, product, or service in the marketplace. Not just your logo, not just your website. It's your customers, prospects, and community members, and even, yes, your employees, understanding of how you contribute to the world at large. All right, so we're going to launch a survey real quick discussing this. And that is up. So as people answer and as the responses roll in, then we will enter.
And Stephen, looking at the time, we're going to have to, I think we're going to have to jump. I don't know, we might have to jump all the way to, our 3-dimensional inoculation, because we're at 11:39. If we're going to leave questions by 11:50, so we're going to have about 10 minutes to go. So I'm saying you can just take a judgment of what you should do, what you should skip before we get to that. I'm not saying to skip everything, but you're gonna have to figure something out there.
Okay.
Okay.
All righty, and we're going to give it about another 30 seconds. All righty, wrapping it up. Anybody who wants to put it in, I'm going to end her right now. So okay. Everybody can see the polling results. Jeff, feel free to take her away, talk about them a little bit.
Yeah, this is actually not bad. The fact that over half of you have identified the value brand brings the marketplace, that's higher than we normally see. So that's positive. Okay, so how well do you do it? And I think what we see there is, kind of that middle, right? Acceptably. And the good news is not a lot poorly or not at all. That's tremendous. But only, less than a quarter you think very well. So hopefully you're going to gain some insights from this, and we're going to kind of see why it's so important to do. But those are pretty decent results. So on the whole, that's on the other hand, if you're part of that 41% that hasn't identified the value, then obviously you have some concerns.
Perfect.
Okay.
All right. So we've got all this stuff. We're going to run through just a mental exercise really quickly, and then we'll go from there. So you guys are in charge in this hypothetical exercise of a company called Acme Supply. You provide widgets. You don't really do any branding or marketing. You don't really think that's super important. And you have a gentleman named Larry. And poor Larry backed up one of your trucks into a transformer box and took out, power for about half of an industrial park and poured widgets all over the street. Blocked up traffic during rush hour. Not a good situation. We're going to run through biases just really quickly and how they apply to branding, marketing, and how the world is going to see you. All right. Jeff touched on this one briefly earlier. So anchoring bias, people assign greater importance to that first piece of information than all other following information. So couch listed for $3,000, discounted to $1,500. That feels like it's worth more money. It's a more valuable couch than one that's just listed for $1,500. Now, in the context of Larry, what does this mean? What if Larry's accident is the first time the world is exposed, or a customer or a prospect is exposed to your company? They learn pretty much immediately that you are the company that trashes the road and gets knocks out power for everybody, and it's bad news. You are now building from the position of anything else that you say about the company, anything else that they're going to learn about the company is built from the starting point of these guys are incompetent or worse. So branding early, branding often lets you get around that. Next bias, this is cognitive dissonance. People tend to reject or undervalue information that conflicts with their worldview. I've worked with Jeff for about 6 years now. Before that, I had heard of Jeff. People told me who he was, told me that he was a great guy. If one of you were to come up to me at the end of this presentation and be like, boy, that Jeff is a jerk, I'm likely not going to believe you. I have a pre-established worldview. Now, if you haven't engaged in preventative branding, in the case of this Larry example, what happens? So there's no cognitive dissonance. In fact, you're going to experience it in the opposite direction. If you had to have no branding that has been established, what happens to your brand? People adopt that. Their worldview becomes, these people are incompetent. But if you do have preventative branding in place, if you are branding on safety and the positive attributes of your business, if an accident happens, people now have to assimilate new information into their understanding of who your company is, what they mean, and what they do. And that means they will value the accident less. They will value the safety issue less because they already know something about you. Their worldview is established.
So,
All right.
Stephen, I want to go back to that real quick, if you don't mind.
For sure.
This is a huge thing we talk about a lot, Nick and I, as far as safety culture and particularly safety management.
Yes.
So this is where your branding, internal branding starts. And I don't know if that's something Jeff may want to hit on in the Q&A, but there may be a difference between internal and external branding, but This is where internal branding starts with your employees. Do I buy into the safety message really means, do I buy into the frontline supervisor, right? That relationship and that trust factor. And once I have an opinion about the company, it may, or because I have a bad manager, that may actually affect how I see the view of the company, which will hinder me from receiving the safety message or actually complying to the policies and procedures. Would you find that to be true?
Yes, that's actually been found in multiple different occasions. There was a study done of a rail. There were two competing rail companies in India. One had a horrific reputation in terms of safety. The other one had a much better one. The one that had the horrific reputation was trying desperately to improve, but they had no internal branding. They had no confidence from their employees. That mindset, looking at cognitive dissonance, that worldview was already established that they didn't care about safety. So even when they implemented more stringent policies than their competitors, they were struggling with adoption because people were dealing with this cognitive dissonance. Whatever new information they received, they weren't really bought into it because they already believed this company to be unsafe.
And that anchor point is already established.
Exactly that.
So thank you.
Absolutely. All right. Negativity bias. People have a tendency to overfocus their mental energy on something bad. Basically what happens, the news is a bummer all the time, but it's a bummer for a reason. We watch, we engage with that sort of thing because we value negative experiences more than positive experiences. We feel them with a greater magnitude. So if we lose 30 jobs at any given point in time, people are significantly, they have more feelings about that than if we gain 30 jobs at any given point in time. So if we have this negativity bias, let's think about Larry again. If something bad happens, Larry's been driving this truck for 20 years without incident. Nobody cares about that. It doesn't mean that much to them. But what is resonant is that he trashed the road and held up everybody's rush hour. Not good. So To fight back that negativity bias, you need to be out there branding and marketing and talking about the positive attributes of your business more often. Because if something bad does happen, naturally, by the way we operate as humans, it's going to carry more weight in people's mind. All right. We have illusory truth effect, people believing things that are repeated frequently, absent of any proof. This has happened all the time with social media. Unfortunately, it happens with news coverage, and you see it happening in actuality with businesses on a day-to-day basis. So if an accident happens, if there's a safety issue, people start talking, and even if it is not the case, the narrative of negligence on the part of the company can develop. Now, if something like this happens, how do you fight back against it? How do you operate within a world that is naturally spreading and people are naturally starting to believe things without a modicum of proof? You have to make sure that you get out there, market and brand, and then also get that messaging out there consistently that combats something that isn't true. All right. So we went through very quickly all that stuff relating to Larry. There are real world applications for this, and I think we're going to skip a couple of them just in the interest of time. But oftentimes the real world applications, they kick things up a notch. Companies can really paint themselves into a painful corner because we wish it was just backing into a transformer box and knocking out power. But unfortunately, there's loss of life, there's millions of dollars in damage. There are a great many things that can happen. So looking at how companies handle branding is a great way to illustrate how everybody should be handling branding or not be handling branding in some of these cases. All right. So we have the Ford River Rouge plant. There was a horrific explosion at Ford River Rouge in '99, 6 fatalities, 14 injuries, numerous safety violations. This is a very, very scary moment for a lot of people and a very nerve-wracking moment for Ford. But what happened? Less than a decade later, they were making it through the 2008 financial crisis without taking any additional money. They weren't being bailed out. In fact, they had a relatively gangbusters 10 years preceding. What happened? Why did this happen? This revolves around branding. They accomplished things through communicating their positive attributes, their competitive advantages of being American made against cars from other countries, their evocation of Americana. You say Ford, you think build Ford tough. You don't think, oh no, River Rouge plant. This was established for 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years before this happened. And they kept on working with it after it happened. So Ford addressed this. They talked about River Rouge, then they moved on. All right. Someone who didn't handle it as well, RE Gas Development. This is one that's a lot closer to home. There was a terrible accident. One worker passed. But this is that case that we were talking about where you see that illusory truth develop. RE Gas, when this accident took place, it suddenly became the narrative shifted. It became talking about the way in which drilling was being conducted improperly, done in a slapdash manner. It's a terrible accident, and the company ended up eventually filing for bankruptcy. There was no branding before. There was no handling of how this accident was just that, an accident. There was no communication of their safety processes in a way that was accessible to the consumer. So it grew to define the company. They performed worse than their competitors and ultimately ended up out of the market. All right. Exxon, one of my favorites to talk about. This is a bizarre one. Before 1989, Exxon did not engage in all that much branding. They had arguably the worst environmental disaster caused by an accident that we have seen in recent memory. A terrible crisis management at the time. Didn't take responsibility for things. Things didn't go well. Yet Exxon is reasonably quite successful now. And they're still enjoying a reasonable amount of market support. They branded themselves on innovation, provider of energy independent solutions, and even green energy. Now, they didn't invest in branding beforehand. That really hurt them in the moment. It made their fall from grace all the worse because for a lot of people, they had no positive attributes attached to Exxon before this. They might have known of them as an oil supplier, an oil company, but that was the extent of the knowledge. So when the accident happened, the conversation about ineptitude and poor behavior on part of Exxon became the defining features. Since then, they have branded and they have recovered because they have branded. All right. And then Lincoln. Successes and failures in branding. This one is just the most amazing success you could think of. If you Google search Lincoln Electric and the word accident, it takes you about 3 to 4 pages to get to reports of accidents with their equipment. Why is this? Lincoln spends an inordinate amount of time branding on their safety, branding on how to use their products properly, and branding on the dangers and what you need to be cognizant of when using their products. By making that a large part of who they are and what they do, they ensure that people can never come back and say, Lincoln left me unprepared. Lincoln left me in a place where there were no safety protocols in place, or I didn't understand why I didn't need to be using these safety protocols. They made it a part of who they are. So that branding inoculates them from the pain of an accident or safety related issue. All right, turning it back over to Jeff. 3-dimensional inoculation through branding.
Yeah, so we're just going to summarize what you've just seen, these real world examples. So you want to call it preventative branding, communicate brand value early and often, define your brand, its strengths, and communicate them early and often, anchor your brand to the positive attributes, create a positive bias in the marketplace towards your company, product, or service. And just remember, your brand is the perceived value of your company, product, or service in the marketplace. And again, that perception over time is based on reality, but you have to communicate that reality, right? You have to be active in communicating that, because the marketplace owns your brand, but you have to influence it. Safety branding. So effectively communicate your investment in safety. And obviously this has a lot to do with just how dangerous the reality of your workplace is. If you're Lincoln Electric, the reality is, welding is a fairly dangerous profession given, context to other kinds of professions. But safety branding, and this gets Mike to your point, begins with internal communication to your employees about how your brand cares about them and has adopted practices and protocols to keep them safe. If an accident does happen, no one can impact the narrative that follows more powerfully in a positive or negative sense to your employees. Hey, as we all know, Jay, not just word of mouth, but obviously even through social media. So if imagine the difference between someone being injured in the workplace and the workers, whether through word of mouth or social media, saying, yeah, well, it's not surprising because this damn place XYZ, versus saying, we spent a lot of time working on those issues and it happened and it's unfortunate, but I know, our company, we do our best on this. A huge difference, right? Whether in media, social media, or just the community you live in, how that's perceived. So it definitely, Mike, as you mentioned, when safety branding starts internally. Now, here's another issue. Depending on what you do, look at Lincoln Electric, right? Dedicating from 1 to 5% of your marketing expenditures to branding your safety practices and protocols can not only help you inoculate you against the devastating consequences of an accident, but can create tremendous goodwill in the marketplace, even if an accident never occurs. So in the oil and gas industry, which we do some work, we know, that's a really important thing, because an accident, as you saw from that previous example, can shut things down, give you a terrible reputation. Employees don't want to work for you. And so actually branding what you do in that area can be something important. Can be important for hospitals to do that kind of thing, right? So by taking both of these steps, if an accident occurs, your customers will experience cognitive dissonance. In this case, we think of cognitive dissonance usually as a bad thing, but this is good because, wait a minute, I've heard all of these good things about your brand or about what you do, and then this bad thing happened. Wait a minute, I got to make sense of this, because obviously this bad thing happened, but I know these good things, so I'm going to give an opportunity to find out what happened and give the benefit of the doubt to the company. And then ultimately, go ahead, recovery branding, concentrate on the brand strength. So may include 2 types of brand messaging. The first directs brand messaging towards the specific context of the safety issues or accident that has occurred. This is necessary when public awareness is such. Your brand needs to directly address the consequences of the mishap and how you're taking steps to ensure future safety. Hey, I'm going to go out of like brand mishaps or safety mishaps, and let's talk about Wells Fargo. I'm hoping no one from Wells Fargo is on, but the reality. Hey, listen, that firm engaged in lots of bad practices in loans and so forth. And there was no way. You've seen they've spent millions and millions of dollars. First, just saying, mea culpa, this happened, it's wrong, here's what we're doing. And now they're spending positive dollars. They had to address that. The marketplace knows. So if someone is killed, if someone is injured, you can't ignore it, right? You've got to address that, right? But of course, the second way is, ensuring you continue to communicate the positive attributes about your brand to the marketplace. and maybe increasing your marketing budget for a period of time, even if not on that issue, right? Here's the other positive things. It could be playing up, hey, maybe for 20 years, your company, maybe you're smaller, privately enterprise, but you've been contributing some really great causes in your marketplace, from charities to kids baseball. Maybe you need to play that up, your role as a member of the community, so people know that, right? So both types of these brand messaging strategies address the behavioral economics concept of illusory truth. In the first case, you're battling the illusory truth that your brand doesn't care about safety, when maybe you really do. In the second case, you define the narrative people experience about your brand by continually exposing people to the positive attributes of your brand. All right. And so, hey, Renee or Mike or Debbie, we got any questions out there from folks?
Hey, I want to jump in there, Jeff. How does that correspond with, I guess you would call it, corporate citizenship? How big is that as far as our brand goes, in order to have some brand value to prevent, is like a good defense in case something happens?
Yeah, exactly. And so, and you're right. I mean, to the point that one thing, it's good that people know, your customers know that you're a good company in terms of good products. That matters. But right, if you know you're a good corporate citizen, if, hey, this X contributes to this, their people are on volunteer cause, that they show up for the habitat to all those things. Yeah, obviously that if something goes bad, employee does something wrong, one office is exposed, again, whether you're talking about a safety mishap or something untoward is done and people have a positive context. Yeah, being a good corporate citizen in times, in bad times, when something bad happens, can be a powerful antidote, to the negative news. Because you can't, when that negative thing happens, if you're trying to deny it, if you're trying to quash it, today's world, you probably can't. So you've got to try to, first of all, already have a good positive context and then react to it.
Yeah, in regards to that internal communication, I think it's so important. Some of our members, are like schools, or some of the internal customers aren't just employees, they're students or, people that we serve in social services and different things. During the pandemic, obviously that creates a lot of crisis potential, a little powder keg there, because a lot of times with schools, parents were getting frustrated and hearing rumors and different things. Well, so-and-so tested positive, and there's a fine area for the schools to have to walk between HIPAA laws and confidentiality, all those different things. And so how important is it to come out with that communication and be the first to do that, I guess, and just have that clear line of communication, whether it's internally or externally, and not just try to sweep it under a rug, I guess.
Yeah. And so the pandemic, Mike, of course, there's going to be books and books written about how government, companies, individuals, dealt with this. But I can say this as a parent of a 15-year-old, that as I talk to parents at other schools, it's clear that some school systems have done a really great job of communicating to parents and sometimes even saying, hey, we don't know, but here's what we're trying to do. And other schools have tried to sweep things under the rug or not been forthcoming why they're making decisions. And I think there's been a huge difference in how, and I think that you see some parents, like I won't go into, where my kid goes to school, feel like, hey, my school system, they may be great at teaching kids, but they've done a really terrible job of communicating through this process. Where another school system right by me, the parents will say, no, this school system's done a great job. And I just have more confidence then in the decisions they make moving forward. And even if they make a wrong decision, I know they had a process they went through. I know they tried to communicate to me what's happening. So yeah, listen, the pandemic's been tough on everybody. Like we all know that, I'm sure we all experience, listen to the science. And sometimes we said, yeah, but the science has said different things, right? But in all walks of life, trying to be as transparent as you can, although there is also such a thing, Mike, right, as TMI, too much information. Like obviously there's some things you don't share until you know enough to share, right? So you do have to be careful. I'm not saying it's easy, but I think we can all see, whether school systems, cities, government, companies, those who've tried to do a good job of communicating versus those who've done a poor job, and there's consequences to that.
Hey, Jeff,
Hey,
could
Jeff,
you or Steven
this is
speak? Nick, are you,
go ahead,
you
Renee.
got a question?
Yeah, I have a question, but go ahead.
Could you speak to how a company can promote their safety branding when it's hard to prove those things that you talked about, like that the companies expect your company to be safe, your customers expect you to be safe, so it's not necessarily valued, and that it's hard to rank yourself against your customers. How can we do safety branding?
Yeah, so I think that although right now, and I'm going to assume we don't have Ohio Edison on this call, but Ohio Edison, despite the recent issues, the really political issues we all know about, I'm sure. But if you look at what they've done, they've realized that, hey, we're kind of this big faceless utility, but in our general marketing, what do? They don't focus on all the hardware and wiring. They focus on the linesmen up there in the lines, putting their lives at risk, right? And doing that. They know that humans. So what I would say, for example, is if you did an ad, you could do something not on necessarily, here's all our protocols in place. No one's going to pay attention, but here's Mike. He's got 3 kids. He's worked for those 15 years. Here's the things that we're doing to keep Mike safe because he cares about his kids like you do and wants to see them graduate, right? The more you can connect anything like this to the real human beings is a powerful way. So that's what I'd say. You're right. It's hard because, like we said, if something goes wrong, you get stomped, even though it's the first time in 15 years it's been an accident. But I think you try to tie it to the human beings who work for you. You put a human face on it. You communicate that you care about that. This is why we do those protocols. So make it as human as you can. Get your employees involved in that kind of safety branding. Get their buy-in. And of course, make sure they think it's authentic and real. And again, first, it better be real, right? If you really aren't doing the right steps and you're trying to put, it's the old put lipstick on a pig, people are going to find out and they'll be more angry at you than they were, had you not lied about it, had you not exaggerated it.
Yeah, and to that end, the other thing is what Mike had mentioned before, is that a lot of it does start internally. Jeff is dead on the money, particularly to your customers or to the world at large. They're not going to engage or care all that much with the safety processes you have in place. But starting internally and ensuring that those processes, protocols, and expectations are communicated to your employees, and why they're in place is communicated to your employees, ensures that everyone inside the company feels that to be true. That way, when you start marketing to the external world, you have that backup, you have that foundation that it's built on, that you understand and that your employees understand.
Hey, Nick, you had a question?
Yeah, so Jeff, at the beginning, you were talking about this whole marketing piece and how we market outside what our company looks like. But from a safety perspective, can these ideas and models be twisted and turned inward to our internal customers, our employees, to market to them to ensure we're engaging them and having them buy into A, our company brand, B, our safety message and ideas, so that we have stakeholders that can go to the outside?
Yeah, that's a great question, Nick, and you're making me think. Yeah, we can certainly we haven't done what you've said, but I love that idea. Basically, you meet with your employees and you say, okay, for you, what does safety mean, right? What does it mean in this particular, generally, and then this particular workplace? And then of all those things safety means, and here's where I think the key is, rank them, right? So what you saw us do, it's one thing, first of all, you have to know what the world of consideration is. Here's all the things we think safety is about. Okay, but now here at this particular facility or in this particular company, whatever all those things you're concerned about, what's most important to you? And now, hey, we want to know which are the ones you think we're best at. What are we good at? And so, yeah, not being afraid to do something like that. And then when you find out what you're good at, communicate that. And then if you're not good at something and it's important, you better actually develop better safety protocol, right? So I want to be clear. We're not trying to, put a happy face on something if it's not right, especially in this world. It's one thing if, you say you have the best pizza in the world and somebody buys it, it's actually pretty mediocre. It's a whole nother thing if you present to the world that you're safe and then somebody gets injured because you really aren't taking the right steps, right? That's devastating to someone's life, to your reputation. And again, maybe like that oil and gas company in Carroll, you're going to go out of business. So I like what you're saying, Nick, and I'm going to give some food for thought about a way we can take our process and do just that. But that's good thinking.
Yeah, I think that's the hardest piece that I hear from safety managers is that we can write all the programs in the world, we can train every day, but it's buy-in. And so I think marketing that buy-in, marketing to the internal customer, we often talk about that, right? We serve our customers. Well, who are our customers? Yeah, they're the outside stakeholders, but they're internal people we work with too. And so if we take that customer basis and market the safety the right way, I think we can start to get some more buy-in to the safety and health programs, creating, I think, a safer workplace, but also creating great word of mouth outside of the business of, hey, look how much my business cares about me, which then helps with that marketing and branding outside to your sales.
Yeah, Nick, what I'm just thinking about, we're all familiar, you're driving through a construction zone on the highway, and we've all seen now, like, drive slow, my mom or dad works here, right? And putting that human face on the message. You could say drive slow, workers, right? But my mom or dad works here. That always kind of catches me, right? That kind of a thing. And the more you can do those kind of things, and maybe with employees, you do the same thing. You say, hey, let's all talk about what are the reasons you want to stay safe. And I think a lot of people are going to say, because I got a kid at home and taking care of her, my wife needs me to show back up, or my husband, right? So tying it into the human consequences to others and why it's so important, maybe gets buy-in. Yeah, maybe you're a little loose with how you're practicing safety. Well, think about the consequences to your child if the dad or mom isn't there as the breadwinner anymore, right? Or the way you make a living, you can't do it the same way. So it all comes back to human beings. I think, at the end of the day, we're not statistics, we're real people, and our lives can be impacted positively or negatively, whether we take safety seriously. So maybe trying to tie those protocols into the reasons why this matters is part of what you could do.
Yeah, Jeff, I like what you said before, and I think you're answering the last question, but there's a clear difference between your brand and campaigning, right? These safety posters we put out a lot of times in our safety world, safety first, and don't do this, wear your hard hat. That's campaigning, and it's not there is a campaigning piece to branding, right? But branding's the relationship. Branding is your internal messaging. For example, I've worked in a couple industrial places in my life where the safety meeting was about a number on a chalkboard, 90 days since last time off. And if we make it a full year, we'll get a steak dinner. Yeah. It didn't really hit home. The steak did, but the number really didn't. It didn't. Those were just numbers. But when you held a picture of someone up and say, hey, this was Bob, and this will happen to our third shift driver, tow motor driver, because, he accidentally went through this and had this accident. It hits home to us, right? I mean, it's not just, I think a lot of people confuse branding between campaigning. Now there's obviously some overlap there, but your brand is how you're going to treat your employees, our culture, our corporate culture at large, and in regards to all that.
That goes back in a different way to when we talked about cognitive dissonance. If you're saying these things, but actually how you're treating people is completely different, then again, you're creating a bigger problem than if you were just more honest about it. But yeah, absolutely. Your brand, again, I want to make clear that even though we talk about brand being the perception of the value, over time, that perception is going to be based on the reality of who you are or not as an organization, what you care about or don't.
Yeah, and Mike, to that end,
Stephen, thank you so much for joining us today. I feel like we're losing a couple people. We've hit our time limit. So I know that you guys got so much great information. I found it very informative and very interesting, and asking myself different questions and scenarios in my own workplace. So I found it very helpful. Your presentation will be available to everyone. And then I think if anyone does want to stay on the line, you guys and address any other questions, you guys can do that. But for the most part, everyone else, you feel free to go if you guys didn't have any other questions.
Yeah. Thank you. Hey, I want to just thank your members. Yeah. Thanks for taking the time out of your day. And please don't hesitate to reach out to us at Prodigal if we can be of help in any way.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. This was great. And honestly, I think this is a topic we could talk about for a long time. So we may have you back again in the future to do another presentation and dig deeper in these topics. Thank you so much. This was very informative.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely.
Appreciate the opportunity. Mike and Debbie and Renee, thanks for inviting Steve and I. We greatly appreciate it.
Jeff, I am going to ask one more question. As
sure.
People, we still have a handful of people out there.
Sure.
You go on TV 21 all the time, WFMJ, I believe it is. Yeah. And they always ask you current questions about what's going on in the world, and some tough questions. So kind of waited till the last minute, but there's a lot of, and I don't want to get any specifics and any kind of thing, but there's a lot of things going on right now between the social climate and political climate that's really having a big impact on brand. Companies losing supply chains. And there's a shift in regards to customer base and actually internal customers. There's a lot of internal pressure now for companies to get involved. I know someone personally, their CEO outside of the Safety Council, much bigger Fortune 500 company, their CEOs are coming out talking about politics openly, which was a taboo in the past to keep those things separate. Now, I don't want to obviously take political positions, but that individual whose CEO came out caused that individual to sell their stock, all their stock in the company,
Yeah.
and said, I no longer support my own company because the political positions. This is a big, internally and externally, it's a big deal. And there seems to be people that still say, like me, don't get those two things involved, but there's an increasing pressure to pressure companies to take a side. How do we navigate those waters until this, I don't know if it's a transition period in our culture or whatever. What are some branding tips that we could do to try to bulletproof our brand?
Yeah,
until this all gets wrinkled out,
Yeah, you saved the toughest question for the end. And obviously, Mike, and without getting into specifics, whether we're talking about Black Lives Matter, whether we're and how one should or shouldn't, whether we're talking about if a CEO is a Trump supporter, right? All those things and all kinds of issues in between. And you're right, the rules are being changed as we speak. But the reality is no one knows exactly who's writing those rules, what the consequences are going to be, right? We know that the gentleman of Goya Foods, there was a kind of campaign to boycott, and he kind of came back out against, and actually his sales went up, but now there's some backlash because of things. So I think it's very difficult. I do think number one, and I don't want to just give boilerplate, counsel. So, but number one, you got to be very careful. You have to really consider it. And before you do anything, I think if I'm a CEO or a spokesperson, I have the right, I want to talk to those around me. I want to vet what I'm about to say. I want to make sure that what I say isn't so from the hip that even if I'm right, maybe in coming out on this issue, I express it in some way that's more damaging than it needs to be. So I just counsel caution on the second end. If you feel that compelled, because again, there are shifting views that you as a corporation have to take a view, then again, work with your professionals and how you do that and understand the long-term consequences. I'm probably a bit old school. I would say, try to refrain when you can. But at the same time, it is a changing world, and corporations, that idea of, you mentioned, Mike, corporate citizenship. And for some, corporate citizenship now means speaking out on some of these issues. Who your shareholders are. And obviously, first, are you a publicly traded company? Are you a private enterprise? Does the world of politics influence your space? Are you ready for the social media reality? We understand we live in a very polarized society. That's part of the danger, right? Is like, you're going to make some people happy, others angrier. And so I say exercise caution, but at the end of the day, the rules are shifting, and I'm afraid that I can't give you a formulaic answer. Certainly, if you're a client of mine, I would talk to you, and we try to talk through the individual circumstances and counsel you on whether or not you need to do or should do something or not. But
yeah, that's good information. We appreciate that. So
I will add one thing to what Jeff said there. So obviously proceed with caution, work with professionals when devising a statement, but as well, the other thing is make sure to keep it authentic to your company in general. You saw a proliferation of people as some of these social movements have spread that come out and make statements and say things and whatnot, but there's nothing behind it. Just like you wouldn't brand on safety if safety was not a part of who you were, you want to ensure that whatever you are talking about is part of who your company is. And that plays back into that consensus building. So ensure, if you do wish to make a political statement of any kind in any direction, that it represents your company as a whole. They can be backed up through the culture that you maintain. Otherwise, it's just air.
All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and cut it. We went way over this time, but you guys had such good information, especially on the behavioral side of things. I really wanted to elaborate that because, the rules are changing in a lot of different areas. And so definitely, and just for clarify, we're not, I hope no one took away that we're trying to teach people how to sweep safety accidents under the rug. That's not the case. We're talking how to engage internally, externally to promote your brand and, take care of those stuff as a preventative caution. And so, Jeff, thank you again. It's awesome. I met you 10 years ago. I haven't seen you in a while. And thanks so much for coming on. I know you're a busy man, so we appreciate your help. Everyone out there, thank you so much, and be safe.
Yeah, be safe. Take care.
Thank you all.